Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the newest album from Periphery, Periphery 4 Hail Stan. Now, Periphery is a band that I got on board with the release of their last studio album, Periphery 3. Thought that was overall a pretty good project. And when it comes to the style of music that Periphery makes, this djenty kind of progressive metal, I'm not exactly... I wouldn't really consider myself a big fan or someone who really dislikes it. Overall, I'm pretty indifferent towards this style of music as a whole. There are bands within this style of music that I like Periphery, for example, and there are some that I just don't care for overall. However, I have, like I just said, found myself enjoying this band's music quite a bit overall, because while they do have that djenty and more technical side of progressive metal in their sound, they also are able to incorporate some, big, catchy, grand hooks in there as well, and overall just are able to mix things up a bit with every release, so that at least with every new album they drop, they seem to be doing at least something a little bit differently and are able to hold my attention overall. So overall, I was looking forward to this new album from these guys, and after hearing this thing a good amount of times now, this is definitely a project that once again sees the band trying out some new things, doing some new experiments, and playing around with some new ideas. But at the same time, there are also some moments on this thing where I feel like these experiments don't exactly stick the landing as nicely as they could have, and there are also some moments on this album that just kind of feel like typical Periphery and just aren't really as interesting overall. The opening track here to this album is a nearly 17-minute long epic track, unlike anything the band has really tried to do before. And for the most part, I would say I like this track. I like a lot of the experimentation that it tries to do, and a lot of the aspects that are present here on this song. However, there are some moments to this thing that I am not the biggest fan of, I guess you could say. I really like in particular the first part of the track. I like how they're able to mix together the more aggressive, harsh vocals with some of the cleaner, catchier vocals. I like the overall mix of sounds that they have going in this first part or so of the track. Overall, it's really Periphery doing what I like them doing at the best that they could do it, really, this first part of the song. I think it's really great overall. However, as the track goes on, there are some elements and experiments that the band decides to do that I don't think are, executed as nicely as they could have been, I guess you could say. There's a spoken word passage that pops up in this track that I feel is just kind of corny sounding overall. It doesn't really mesh all too nicely with the tone of the rest of the track. And I know this band has never taken themselves completely seriously. I mean, the title of this album alone should be a pretty clear indication of that, but still, I can't help feel like this spoken word part just doesn't really fit very nicely in with the rest of this song. There's also some manipulated vocal parts that come in later on in the track as well that I also just think don't sound all too pleasant, I guess. And even just, really everything that comes after the first part of the song or so is just not as memorable as the first part of the track. I do feel like this track could be shortened a little bit more, I guess. I am a fan of longer tracks, especially when they're able to incorporate lots of different sounds and styles and just have a really big, grand, and large vibe to them. But this track, it tries to do it to some extent, but I don't think it executes it perfectly, I guess. I will say I like the majority of this song overall. I think it's still one of the better songs in the track listing, but I just wish it maybe stuck the landing a bit better than it actually ended up doing. Outside of this opening track, there are a couple of highlights that you get here on this project. The track Blood Eagle, which is one that I really liked when I first heard it as a single, is still one that I think is one of the stronger moments here on the album as a whole. I like how they're able to incorporate a variety of different sounds and styles here into this one track. I think it really shows the band taking a lot of the different things that they can do as a group and compressing it here into this one song, which it's by no means a really short song, but at the same time it's definitely shorter than a track like Reptile, and it's pretty cool to see the band doing all these different things here in this one compact song. I still think it's one of the highlights here on the project, and overall, really solid song. The track It's Only Smile sees the band doing some of their more poppier, catchier sounds. I tend to like this sound from the band overall. I know it's not the most metal thing in the world by any means, but I like it overall. And I think this track does a pretty decent job of executing this sound. The chorus here on this track is pretty catchy. Overall, one of the more memorable tracks in the track listing, in my opinion. And the track Crush on this thing is kind of an interesting one overall. It sees the band dipping into some more electronic, even almost industrial electronic sounds here. and it's definitely an interesting experiment. The instrumental to this track is, as a result of a lot of these genre experiments, one of the more interesting ones on the album, for better or worse. I think the chorus here on this track is one of the more solid ones here on the project. Once again, it's pretty catchy, it's pretty memorable. However, I'm not exactly the biggest fan, I guess, of the outro of this track. I feel like it's kind of longer than it needs to be, and it just kind of wastes my time to some extent. It sounds pleasant enough, I guess, but I don't know, it just doesn't do a whole ton for me. And this is a problem I have with several of the cuts here on this project. A lot of them have kind of drawn out outros that I don't feel like need to be as drawn out as they are. And this is a problem I also had with the band's last album as well on a couple of tracks there, but it became a bit more noticeable to me here, and it's a bigger problem here, I guess. Outside of Crush, you also have tracks like Church Burner, which also has a longer, more extended outro, even Reptile as well, though I even brought that up a bit earlier in the review. Some of these tracks, I feel like the outros to them could be cut a little bit shorter. You could shave a few minutes off this album by doing that alone, and this entire thing would be a bit more concise and to the point, I guess, which is something I think this album needs to be a bit more for me to like it a bit more. It feels a bit bloated at times between some of these longer outros and between some of the tracks I just feel don't add a whole ton to the project overall. The tracks Follow Your Ghost and Sentient Glow are two of the more forgettable cuts on this thing. They really don't see the band doing all too much that's really different for them, or stepping outside of their comfort zone, really. They're not bad songs by any means. They're at the very least still listenable and somewhat enjoyable on a very surface level, but they didn't really jump out to me as being highlights here on this project, and I feel like you could probably cut them out of the track listing and have a more concise, to-the-point project overall. And the track Church Burner is one that sees the band getting a lot more aggressive and in your face, which is a nice change of pace here on the project, I will say. However, I'm not the biggest fan of the track overall. I just don't think it's super memorable, I guess, outside of the fact that it does change the pace up in the album a bit. Yeah, I do like what the track is doing on a very surface level, but when I start to get into it a bit deeper, it just doesn't really stick with me all that much. The track Garden in the Bones, while it was a song that I liked a fair bit when it was dropped as a single, hearing it here in the context of the project, kind of like Church Burner, I like it more so for what it does in the track listing as opposed to what it is as an actual song itself. I like the fact that it's a breather coming after the more intense Church Burner. However, I just kind of feel like between some of the more interesting and experimental moments on this project, it's just one of the least memorable cuts on this thing, I guess. Overall, the sound of this project is one that sees Periphery occasionally stepping out of their comfort zone, particularly on tracks like Reptile and Crush, where they do play around with some different sounds and some new ideas. However, at the end of the day, it is still very much that djenty, progressive metal sound that the band has been doing for years at this point. Overall, they do it decently enough here on this project. However, I feel like when they're not stepping out of their comfort zone on some of the safer cuts on this thing, it just can feel a bit stale and not that interesting at times. The vocals on this project are pretty solid as well. I like some of the catchy choruses that pop up on this thing, as I said before. I think the vocals in those moments sound really nice. The clean vocals, that is, and the aggressive vocals on this thing sound pretty solid throughout as well. Overall, I think that if you cut out some of the fat from this project, whether that be some of the least memorable cuts from this thing, or just some of the longer outros or segments of some of these songs that just aren't as interesting as others, I feel like you'd have a more concise, to the point, but at the same time more enjoyable project than what you get here with Periphery 4. I respect and like some of the experiments that go on this thing, on some of the more experimental cuts, but occasionally they don't stick the landing quite as nicely as I hoped that they would have. Overall, I'd say I enjoyed my experience with this album more than I'd say I didn't enjoy it. This is definitely still a pretty good album in my opinion. However, I don't think it's quite as good as the band's last studio album. And I think this one, overall, just needs to be maybe a little bit shorter, lose some of the less interesting moments on it, and maybe experiment a bit more. Because some of the experiments they do on this thing end up being, at the very least, interesting and entertaining. And at best, they could sound pretty darn good. So yeah, overall, I'd say that this is a pretty decent album, one that you should check out if you're a fan of this band, if you're a fan of this style of music. I think you'll definitely get something to enjoy from this album. However, if you've never been a fan of Periphery, if you haven't been a fan of this djenty style of progressive metal, I don't think this album's going to change your mind by any means, so you should probably not listen to this project. But yeah, overall, decent project, but that's just my own personal opinion. If you happen to disagree, you happen to have an opinion of your own, rather you liked it more than I did or disliked it more than I did, It's perfectly fine. Feel free to leave your own thoughts in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content. Things like album reviews, track reviews, countdown lists, things of that sort. If you like that kind of content, make sure you subscribe. Thank you for watching once again, and stay golden.